Caitlin Clark walks onto the court, slaps hands with one teammate, then another, and then, right in front of her, Angel Reese has her hand out. And Caitlin Clark turns away. She just walks in the opposite direction. Every second of that moment was caught on a live broadcast camera during a Team USA game, and the internet absolutely erupted. But before you pick a side, before you declare who's right and who's wrong, I want you to stick around, because there is so much more to this story than one viral clip. And what happened just 4 days later might actually change the entire way you think about this rivalry. Let's rewind for a second and set the stage, because this moment didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened during the 2026 FIBA Women's World Cup qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico, which took place from March 11th through March 17th. Team USA brought together some of the biggest names in women's basketball, including Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and Paige Bueckers, and they absolutely dominated. They went 5-0 in the tournament, with their closest game being a 14-point win over Spain in the final. This wasn't a tournament where the outcome was ever in doubt. The United States outclassed every team on the floor. But here's the thing. When the games themselves aren't particularly competitive, when you're winning by 30 and 40 points, the cameras start looking for other stories. And the biggest story walking into that tournament was always going to be the same one. How would Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese coexist on the same team? These two have been at the center of the most talked about rivalry in women's basketball for the last 3 years, and for the first time in this qualifying event, they were wearing the same jersey. Same bench. Same huddle. Same goal. But the history between them is layered, and it is deep, and that context is essential to understanding why a 2-second high-five moment turned into one of the most discussed clips in women's basketball this year. This rivalry traces back to at least the 8th or 9th grade, when both players reportedly competed against each other on the AU circuit. But the moment that truly ignited everything was the 2023 NCAA Women's Basketball Championship game. Angel Reese's LSU Tigers defeated Caitlin Clark's Iowa Hawkeyes for the national title, and in the closing moments of that game, Reese turned toward Clark and pointed to her ring finger, echoing the John Cena "You can't see me" wave that Clark herself had used earlier in the tournament. That gesture became one of the most replayed moments in college basketball history. It was polarizing, it was bold, and it set the tone for everything that followed. The following year, in the 2024 NCAA Tournament Elite Eight, Clark's Iowa Hawkeyes got their revenge, eliminating Reese's LSU Tigers. Both players then entered the 2024 WNBA draft, with Clark going number 1 overall to the Indiana Fever and Reese going 7th to the Chicago Sky. Their rivalry continued in the pros, with a series of physical, emotional, and intensely watched matchups. One game in June 2024 featured a flagrant foul from Reese on Clark that became a lightning rod for debate. In 2025, the intensity didn't ease, with another confrontation after Clark fouled Reese during a game, which was upgraded to a flagrant after review, and both players' teammates received technical fouls in the ensuing exchange. Now, here is an important detail that often gets overlooked in these discussions. Clark's 2025 WNBA season was cut short by a series of lower body injuries. She suffered a right groin injury in mid-July during a game against the Connecticut Sun, and that, combined with a bone bruise and other nagging issues, limited her to just 13 games in the entire 2025 season. She missed the Fever's playoff run entirely. So when Clark stepped onto the court in Puerto Rico for this FIBA qualifier, it was the first time fans had seen her play competitive basketball in roughly 8 months. That matters. That context matters enormously, both for understanding her performance and for understanding the intensity of the spotlight on her every move. So now let's get to the moment itself. It was the second quarter of Team USA's game against Puerto Rico on March 13th. Clark was checking into the game with about 4 minutes and 56 seconds left in the half. As she walked onto the court, she began slapping hands with her teammates, the way every player does when they sub in. One high five, two high fives, moving down the line. And then there was Angel Reese, hand extended, clearly expecting Clark to continue the sequence. But Clark turned her head toward the action on the court and walked in the opposite direction. Reese was left standing there with her hand out, and the broadcast cameras captured every frame of it. Now, let me be honest about what we can and cannot know from that clip. We can see that Clark did not make contact with Reese's hand. We can see that Reese had her hand extended. We can see that Clark turned away. What we cannot see is what Clark was looking at. We cannot see her eyes clearly enough to know whether she saw Reese's hand. We cannot read her mind. And that ambiguity is exactly what made this moment explode online. Because depending on what you already believe about these two players, you saw something completely different in that clip. In terms of the game itself, Clark had a relatively modest performance against Puerto Rico, finishing with 8 points, 2 assists, and 3 rebounds in 18 minutes, shooting 2 of 6 from the field. Reese, on the other hand, had a standout game, posting the only double-double of the contest with 10 points and a game-high 13 rebounds, which reportedly set a new United States record for a Women's World Cup qualifier. Both contributed to a lopsided 91-48 victory. But the scoreline was an afterthought. Everyone was talking about the high five. Fan reactions split predictably along existing loyalties. According to posts circulating on social media, some viewers saw the moment as clearly intentional. One person wrote that it was, quote, "hella disrespectful, and that does look intentional." Another pointed out how Reese appeared to be waiting patiently for her turn in the high-five line, holding her hand out in a spirit of teamwork, only for Clark to act as though she wasn't there. On the other side, Clark supporters argued that it was an honest miss, that she was focused on the game, that she was looking at the play developing on the court, and simply didn't notice Reese's outstretched hand. One fan said they couldn't imagine Clark leaving a teammate hanging like that, but admitted it wasn't a great look. And then there was a third faction, and this is where the conversation gets more interesting. There were people who pointed out that this reaction, this intense scrutiny of a 2-second interaction during a blowout qualifier, is itself part of the problem. These analysts and commentators raise the question of whether we've created an environment where every micro-interaction between Clark and Reese gets dissected like it's the Zapruder film. When two athletes are placed under this level of surveillance, where every glance, every hand movement, every facial expression is captured, slowed down, replayed, and interpreted by millions of people, it becomes almost impossible for anything to happen between them that isn't turned into a narrative. A missed high five becomes a calculated snub. A glance becomes a glare. A moment of inattention becomes a statement of disrespect. This is actually a fascinating dynamic to think about. In the NBA, rivalries between players on the same Olympic or All-Star team are commonplace. Larry Bird and Isaiah Thomas, Kobe Bryant and just about everyone, LeBron James and his various rivals over the years. These players have managed to compete fiercely against each other and then coexist on the same team when the situation required it. Sometimes the tension was visible. Sometimes it led to awkward moments. But rarely was every single interaction between them analyzed with the intensity that Clark and Reese face. Part of that is the era we live in. Social media didn't exist when Bird and Magic were playing on the 1992 Dream Team. There were no smartphones, no instant replays posted to Twitter within seconds, no algorithms pushing the most controversial takes to the top of everyone's feed. But part of it is also specific to Clark and Reese, and we should be honest about that. Their rivalry has become a proxy for larger cultural conversations about race, about media coverage of women's sports, about fan entitlement, about whose success gets celebrated and whose gets diminished. These are real, important conversations, but when they get layered onto every single basketball interaction between two 23-year-old women, the weight of it becomes extraordinary. Every high five or missed high five carries the burden of all those larger debates. Now, here is where the story takes what I think is a genuinely important turn. Just 4 days after the viral snub moment, during Team USA's final qualifier game against Spain on March 17, something happened that got far less attention, but arguably tells a much more complete story. During the game, Clark drove to the basket and was fouled hard. She went down to the floor, and the person who came over to help her up was Angel Reese. Reese reached out her hand, pulled Clark to her feet, and they moved on. Then, a short time later, Clark threw an assist to Reese on a layup, and the two exchanged high fives. Multiple high fives, in fact. Bleacher Report posted a highlight of the sequence, with a caption celebrating the teamwork between them. Reports suggest that this moment indicated Reese didn't hold any ill will over the earlier high five miss. Whether Clark's original turn away was intentional or accidental, Reese's actions in the Spain game communicated something clear. She was there to play, to win, and to be a teammate. And Clark's assist to Reese, followed by their mutual celebration, communicated the same thing. This is the part of the story that didn't go as viral. And that tells you something about how we consume sports content in 2026. The conflict clip got tens of millions of views across platforms. The reconciliation clip, the teamwork clip, the clip that showed two rivals finding a way to coexist and actually collaborate for a common goal, they got a fraction of the attention. That asymmetry is worth sitting with, because it shapes the narratives we build around athletes and the pressure we put on them. Let me also address something that came up repeatedly in fan discussions. Multiple people pointed out that Angel Reese's brand has, in many ways, been built around her rivalry with Clark. From the hand gesture in 2023 to the physical play in the WNBA to her social media presence, Reese has leaned into the competitive dynamic. That's not a criticism. That's a recognition of how modern athletes build their profiles. Rivalries generate attention, and attention generates opportunity. Clark has benefited from the rivalry too, becoming one of the most marketable athletes in the world, the 2024 WNBA Rookie of the Year, and now the MVP of the 2026 FIBA Women's World Cup qualifying tournament. That's right. After all the drama about the high five, after all the debate about whether these two could coexist, Caitlin Clark was named the tournament's most valuable player, averaging 11.6 points and 6.4 assists per game across Team USA's 5 wins. She looked sharp, she looked healthy, and for a player returning from an injury that cost her most of the 2025 season, the performance was extremely encouraging for Fever fans. Reese also had a strong tournament. Her rebounding was dominant throughout, and she showed that she can be a force on the international stage in addition to her WNBA career. The fact that both players can excel in the same tournament, on the same team, should be the headline. But it rarely is, because the conflict is always more compelling to the algorithm. So where does this leave us? The WNBA season is expected to start around May, though there is some uncertainty due to ongoing CBA negotiations. If the season begins on schedule, Clark will be entering her 3rd year with the Fever, and Reese will continue to build on what has been an impressive start to her professional career with the Sky. They will face each other again. The cameras will be rolling. Every interaction will be scrutinized. And that brings me to the question I think is worth asking. What do we actually want from this rivalry? Do we want genuine animosity? Do we want these two players to actually dislike each other, to refuse to work together, to carry petty grudges onto the court every single game? Or do we want what the best rivalries in sports have always offered, which is two supremely talented competitors pushing each other to be better, while maintaining enough mutual respect to shake hands at the end of the day. Because what I saw in Puerto Rico, when I look at the full picture and not just the one viral clip, was something closer to the second option. I saw two young women with a complicated history who showed up for their country, played hard, had an awkward moment that may or may not have been intentional, and then demonstrated 4 days later that they can get past it. That Reese reached down to help Clark up. That Clark found Reese for a bucket. That they celebrated together. The internet will always prefer the conflict. The algorithm will always boost the snub over the handshake. But the reality of sports, and the reality of human relationships, is usually messier and more nuanced than any one clip can capture. Clark and Reese are rivals. They may never be best friends. But they don't have to be. What they have to be is competitors who bring out the best in each other. And so far, despite all the noise, that's exactly what they've done. Women's basketball is more watched, more discussed, and more culturally relevant than it has ever been, and these two players are a huge reason why. So before you share that high five clip one more time, before you fire off a take about who disrespected whom, ask yourself this. Are we building up women's basketball by obsessing over every moment of perceived conflict between its two biggest stars? Or are we slowly turning a genuinely great sports rivalry into something toxic, something that hurts the players, the league, and the fans who actually love the game? I think the answer to that question matters a lot more than whether Caitlin Clark saw Angel Reese's hand. Let me know what you think in the comments. Did you see the Spain game clip where Reese helped Clark up? Did that change your perspective at all? I'd love to hear from both sides, because this conversation is only going to keep going as we head into what should be an incredible WNBA season. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.